to thank Grant Nichols to be able to join us in this debate, to bring his view about U.S. anti-corruption enforcement, what we can expect next. We also have to debate with him Adriana and Bernardo, who are very well known in Brazil, each one in their respective areas here. But it's going to be a great debate, and Rafaela will moderate the event as well. So we're very glad to have you all to debate what we can expect on U.S. enforcement on anti-corruption. Many thanks for your time. I hope everyone enjoys the event. And Cecilia, please take the floor.
Adriana and Bernardo to participate, and Rafaela, of course, to participate in our webinar today. And I would like to introduce our guests. Grant Nichols is a partner in the Special Matters and Investigation Practice in King & Spalding Austin office. Prior to becoming a lawyer, Grant worked for the Department of Justice as a Special Assistant to the Attorney General and for the White House Counsel's Office as Executive Assistant to the Deputy Counsel. Adriana Dantas is partner at Lefosse Advogados, chairperson of IADB Sanctions Committee and chair of Committee Compliance Subcommittee and the Anti-Corruption Committee at IBA. And Bernardo Gouthier Macedo, he is PhD in Economics, University of Campinas, is a managing partner of LCR Competition Practice, WWL Thought Leader, and ANJ at the ICN. Bernardo is in charge of economics at IBRAC. Rafaela is an associate in the Special Matters and Investigation Practice of King & Spalding. Rafaela is one of the coordinators of IBRAC's Compliance and Investigations Committee. So, Grant, the floor is yours.
So, thanks, Cis and Bruno, and all thanks for being here today with us, and thanks again for our speakers for accepting our invitation. Before starting our discussion, I just want to give a brief introduction to explain that the idea of this discussion came up with the publication of the U.S. strategy on countering corruption last December. So 8 months have passed since then, and we thought it was a good time to discuss what we have seen in terms of enforcement now. So, Grant, we would love to hear from you about the status of anti-corruption enforcement, whether you have noticed any changes in terms of enforcement in comparison to the prior administration, and what you can tell us about this strategy.
Thanks, Rafaela, and everyone for joining us this morning. Adriana, Bernardo, thank you for having me. Really excited to be here. I think this will probably not be especially groundbreaking for everyone to hear, but I do think that there have been some changes to answer your question up front with the Biden administration. And I think we should expect, as a result of these changes, U.S. enforcement of anti-corruption cases to follow what I would consider to be a very similar pace or trajectory to what we have seen historically. And I mean that kind of in the prior 10 years, maybe putting to the side a few outlier years. I think we should expect to see in the coming year and a half, 2 years, a return to what we've seen historically. And I think there's a number of reasons to think that will happen, that will return to that trajectory or pace. And I want to, if it's okay, spend just maybe a few minutes at the top of our program here, focusing on 3 reasons why I think we might return to that pace. One is kind of what you mentioned, Rafa, at the beginning, Biden administration policies and public statements coming from the administration about corruption and in general corporate enforcement. I think that's one thing that we can look to that signals a return to that pace. Another is just a reminder about the resources that the U.S. government has devoted to anti-corruption enforcement. I think we should, we can talk about that for just a moment. And then also looking at just the active cases in the pipeline and the recent settlements. I think in the second quarter of 2022, we saw, kind of maybe not a full return to what we've seen before, but certainly something resembling what we saw before. And so let me maybe just take each of those quickly, kind of one at a time. So the first is the Biden administration policy announcement and other public statements. As I said, there has been, I think undeniably, a downtick in corporate anti-corruption settlements in the last year and a half. But I think to just look at the number of settlements and maybe the size of the settlements only tells part of the story. And I don't think that it would be correct to draw the conclusion that this dip that we've seen in cases somehow means that the United States will not continue to pursue corruption cases as aggressively as it has in the past. In part, there's just some natural occurrences here. There's the slowdown as a result of a change in administration. We see that routinely in FCPA enforcement. And there's also been a slowdown as a result of the pandemic, of course. That has a real effect on enforcement authorities' ability to investigate these cases. But I think even if you put those things aside, I think it's important to look at the policies and the other public statements from the Biden administration that I think really do signal that this is going to be an area of focus for the U.S. government for quite some time. And let me just talk about a couple of them. The first is something that Rafa, you mentioned at the top of the call about the Biden administration's U.S. strategy on countering corruption, which was rolled out last December. I'll call it the strategy memo for short, kind of going forward. But that announcement followed even a prior announcement in the summer of 2021 that corruption is a key national security concern for the United States. And I'll talk about the strategy memo more in a moment, but that's one signal. Another is that there are notable public statements from DOJ regarding corporate enforcement generally. And those public statements coming from the DAG's office, from the head of the criminal division, I think signal closer scrutiny and heightened enforcement in white collar cases. And that, of course, includes the FCPA, which is often the tip of the spear in some of our white collar cases. These public statements have included a focus on certifications for compliance officers where their companies have entered into resolutions with the government. They've talked about an increased willingness to impose monitors for companies that violate the FCPA and other laws. And there is an expectation that companies cooperating with DOJ in their investigations identify all individuals involved in misconduct and not just those substantially involved, which again is a bit of a shift, I think, in how DOJ has approached investigations relative to the prior administration. And so it's one that I think is an important signal for us to show how seriously the administration is taking these kinds of cases. These policy updates that I just mentioned, of course, extend beyond the FCPA, but they are important indicators, I think, and the aggressive stance that I anticipate the government will be taking in pursuing corporate criminal matters, including the FCPA. So those are the policy and public statements I wanted to touch on just really quickly, and maybe we can get back to the strategy memo in a moment. But before I do, I also wanted to mention, as I said, that the resources that are devoted to anti-corruption enforcement in the United States. We have within DOJ a dedicated FCPA unit that I'm sure many of those participating are familiar with. I think it's a helpful reminder for us all to remember that FCPA unit has, kind of recently has anywhere between 30 and 35 attorneys that are in that FCPA unit investigating FCPA cases at all times. And that's a substantial set of resources. There is also within the fraud section a dedicated squad of FBI agents that are assigned to specializing in complex matters like FCPA investigations. So in addition to your prosecutors, you have agents that are centrally focused on cases like this. That the number of lawyers and agents that I just mentioned doesn't even include the number of attorneys at agencies like the SEC and now the CFTC. So I think it's clear that when you look kind of across the government, there's a lot of resources devoted to these cases. And then finally, the third point I mentioned, just to kind of table set for us, and thanks for everyone's patience as I kind of tick through these and hopefully set something up for additional conversation later on, is that we look at the active cases and the recent settlements coming out related to the FCPA. The number of resolutions that we've seen in 2021 and even in the first half of 2022 certainly don't stack up to the pace of cases we saw in years like 2018, certainly 2019 and 2020. But the second quarter, as I mentioned, of this year did see a brief uptick in resolutions. And something that we may get to is that, 3 of those cases included alleged misconduct in Brazil and cooperation with Brazilian authorities in those investigations. So, it's difficult to say whether the number of settlements and resolutions will go back up to prior year levels, or really, I think it will. I think it's a more of a question of how soon they return to that. But it's something that, I think that we expect to happen in no small part, because at least if you read reports, there are as many as, 30 or more known FCPA cases currently under investigation by either DOJ or the SEC. And so I think if you take all that together, it doesn't seem implausible that will return to prior years. And then it's especially true when you look at the strategy memo that the Biden administration released and the other public statements coming out from DOJ. So I think kind of that's the collection, I think, of thoughts and atmosphere that leads me to say a very long-winded answer to your question, which is that, I think we're on pace to return to where we are, and everything's signaling as much. Papa, and
thanks, Grant.
Please go ahead.
As you said, one of the pillars of the strategy memo is to expand cooperation with other jurisdictions, and we have seen that a large number of cases involving Brazil and the DOJ noticing cooperation with the Brazilian authorities. So is the trend we have seen of increased cross-border cooperation something that we expect to continue? And I would love to hear as well Adriana's thoughts on that from the Brazilian perspective.
Yeah, I think the short answer is yes. We should expect that to continue at least globally. And like you, I really want to hear from Adriana on her views from a Brazil perspective. And again, maybe before I hand it over, you're right that one of the pillars of the strategy memo is an emphasis on working with partner countries and engaging with them in detecting and disrupting foreign bribery. That's not a new development, but it is something that was emphasized in the strategy memo, as well as, just briefly, a couple of other things. It highlighted other mechanisms like anti-money laundering laws and intelligence sharing to identify and root out corrupt actors. It also, emphasizes the importance of the private sector building and supporting robust compliance programs. That's something that I think DOJ has really doubled down on in the past few months. And finally, I think this is something for us to all keep an eye on. The strategy memo calls for annual reports back up to the president about what's being done with under the umbrella of this strategy memo. And I hope is something that we will, be able to see and understand and get a read on how they are working on this enforcement. But that was a little detour. Rafa, sorry for that. Just on the strategy memo, but I think it all supports exactly what you're saying. That I think we can, at least from the U.S. perspective, we do anticipate that the U.S. government will continue to benefit really from cross-border cooperation with the U.S. law enforcement counterparts. I think when it comes to Brazil, definitely want to hear more. But maybe one last thing, Adriana, if you'll bear with me, I do want to mention that 3 cases recently, the recent announcements of Stericycle case, the Glencore case, of course, as well as Tenaris, all had components, and these are kind of the 3 major-ish like corporate compliance settlements coming out of DOJ and SEC in the past few months, all involve misconduct, not always centrally, but at least in part, coming out of Brazil. And in each of them, either DOJ or SEC or both thanked Brazilian authorities for their help in conducting the investigation, and also mentioned kind of parallel investigations that were going on in Brazil. And so, we can get into some of the details of the cases if that's helpful to others in the audience. But I think in response to your question, the most important thing to emphasize is that even in the most recent cases that have been announced by the Department of Justice and SEC, we are seeing, kind of the signals that cross-border cooperation is continuing and is strong, and is something I think the U.S. government would like to continue. So I've talked way too long. Adriana, I would really welcome your views on whether you think this cross-border cooperation is continuing, especially from the Brazil perspective. Do you think we'll see more?
First, I want to thank you all for this invitation. Very honored to be here speaking with you. Grant, thank you for your thoughts on the strategy and sharing with us all your views and perspectives based on your rich experience, both in the public and private sectors. I believe that cross-border cooperation is at the essence of fighting corruption and transnational crime, in addition to money laundering. There is no way out. And authorities have progressed. Their cooperation has evolved a lot in the past years, because there is a number of cases where authorities had the chance to make mistakes, to learn from the mistakes, and improve the ability to work together and closely. This case that you mentioned, Tenaris and Glencore, for instance, are cases that derive from the car wash operation, which was an operation that launched a closer interaction between Brazilian and U.S. authorities. Cross-border cooperation is also an element that is behind the reasons for the new regulation that was put in place, that was became published on July 12. There is a regulation on the Brazilian Clean Company Act that has as a key factor addressing transnational corruption. So in order to effectively address transnational corruption or money laundering, you have to cooperate with foreign authorities. There is no way out. And when I was serving at Petrobras, we in the sanctions committee at Petrobras, I had the opportunity to work with the General Controller's Officer in a number of cases that require inputs from foreign authorities. Petrobras is not at the front of that. CGU is the General Controller's Office of the Union. All transnational cases involving federal money, involving federal resources here in Brazil, they involve the General Controller's Office. So CGU is at the forefront of cross-border cooperation in the administrative level here in Brazil, whereas the Federal Prosecutor's Office also is very active on that front. So I was part of the cases. I would receive information, my committee was. But although we were not, how can I say, leading that the corporation front, and I can only say how helpful it is to receive this type of of information. With another hat at the IDB, the Inter-American Development Bank Sanctions Committee, the committee also, the Office of Institutional Integrity, that is the equivalent for the prosecutors within the IDB world, they rely a lot on corporation to build their cases. They have to get information that was, particularly in this international administrative tribunals, where they don't have the resources that police officers have to break, for example, the financial records, to record communications between criminals or criminal organizations. So cooperation is key to build the evidence of a case. So I don't see any other way out of cross-border cooperation if authorities want to continue fighting and enforcing their anti-corruption and anti-money laundering laws.
Thanks, Adriana. Thanks, Grant. So Adriana, a related question for you is like, I think everyone feels that like anti-corruption enforcement in Brazil has slowed down a little bit in the last years. Mm-hmm. But I was just wondering whether, to what extent the Brazilian authorities are initiating investigations independently, like the DOJ, or if they are just like working together with the DOJ in investigations that were initiated abroad.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Rafa. Everyone has the sense that enforcement has reduced its pace since having the car wash years as a benchmark. For me, honestly speaking, the car wash years are not an adequate benchmark. They were a specific moment in time where there was this huge enforcement, and we were learned by doing. This is very, in my view, the exception, not the rule. What I have been seeing on my private practice, because I was at Petrobras until June 30th, very recent, and Petrobras, as you may know, is the entity of the Brazilian administration that has imposed the largest amount of sanctions administrative sanctions under the Brazilian Company Act. I saw a growing number of cases, honestly speaking. I see many cases. There were cases that were still a result of the car wash, but they were not a rule. And in the administrative level at CGU and all the bodies, the state level and the city level that enforce the Brazilian Film Company law, there has been a lot of work that has put in place to train these officials. For instance, I'm going at the end of the month to an event that is promoted by the Ministry of Economy to train officials that are responsible for implementing the Brazilian Film Company law. So there is a lot of effort that is put in place on training, exchanging best practice, learning by doing, and this in turn leads to great enforcement. These are not the huge cases that are the highlights in the forefront of the news, but there are smaller cases that show that there is action. Even CGU, when they released the press release for the new decrees that came into the press on July 12, accounted for 1,154 cases, administrative sanctioning procedures that were brought in the past years under the Brazilian Company Act. I think this is a significant number. We have to have in mind that building a case is not very easy. You have to have strong evidence. There is the procedure is subject to due process. So this shows that authorities are active, and you also see a large number as well at the prosecutors level. I have seen more action in the administrative sphere, but I see there is momentum still, and we have to keep working. The media, the reporters do a good job on that, and let's see what will happen after the elections. No, but I'm surprised to see that at least in the administrative fronts, authorities have continued to work. There are a number of professional development events, and the idea is to continue to have an effective enforcement of the rules. And the new decree that was recently published and came into force on July 18th shows that there is an intent to constantly improve, grow, and learn from what has happened in the last months. So this is my personal view, Rafa.
Yeah, very interesting. It seems like we are getting more mature and continue developing our enforcement system. So just going back to grant and what we expect here in the US to happen, you briefly mentioned that companies have been revising their compliance programs to adjust to the current expectations from the DOJ. So could you please give us more color on that? What you have seen? What are the areas that companies are paying more attention now?
Yeah, happy to, Rafa. And I think this dovetails nicely with what Adriana was talking about. It's interesting for me to hear about the emphasis that's going into training and those efforts kind of on the ground. I think are consistent exactly with what you're saying, Rafa. The maturity of both the enforcement regime and how it evolves kind of within the private sector as a result is very interesting to watch unfold. And you're seeing that you're seeing kind of a re-emphasis on that here in the US as well. And I think this is a really important area, especially for those that are in-house or advisor functions, because this emphasis on compliance and how to grow compliance programs and to make them more mature has been something that actually is not a kind of recent or Biden administration development. This is something, if you look back in 2019, 2020, there was a strong emphasis in the Trump administration on improving compliance programs and issuing guidance from DOJ so that companies had a better idea of what the expectations were. And some of those focused on things like shoring up your compliance programs with improved data analytics or driving more resources to compliance functions or giving those compliance functions greater authority or autonomy to identify and remediate occurrences of misconduct. Those have kind of been the themes that we have seen over the past few years. And we are seeing, again, DOJ doubling down on that guidance. And I think in some ways it's even raising the stakes in a way that I think is probably a little concerning maybe to some chief compliance officers out there. And referring to the announcement that DOJ is at least, they frame this in kind of a mushy way, but there's an expectation that chief compliance officers will certify compliance as part of negotiated settlements with DOJ. I think that's caused some alarm, but it's probably consistent with this trajectory that we've been seeing of an emphasis on compliance. And consider on top of that, Ken Polite, who's the head of the criminal division at DOJ, he's been making a lot of statements about this. He is a former chief compliance officer himself. And he has noted not only some of these announcements about the expectations on the back end of settlements from chief compliance officers, but also how in the course of an investigation, how he would prefer and his office would prefer to hear directly from the compliance function when a company is coming in to make a presentation on the strength of its compliance program, which I think, again, may be a little nerve-wracking for people, right? Compliance officers that may be in the midst of an investigation. But again, all consistent with this theme that there's a greater focus on this. And I think that this, essentially what this amounts to is that, what we are seeing, to start to get to your question, Ava, what we are seeing is that companies are devoting more resources, are devoting more focus and attention to their compliance function. About that, I have no doubt. It's just, it is extremely challenging, right? Because it's very difficult to marshal the resources that would be necessary to do everything that the DOJ outlines in its kind of guidance and expectations around compliance programs. And that's especially true for, well, really even large companies, but especially true for medium and small size companies that are operating, globally or at least multinationally, and perhaps in some geographies that would be considered high risk by the U.S. government. I mean, these are companies that do not have large margins and resources to be able to devote to compliance programs. And so I think that's where the pinch is. And I think that's what we are seeing, and that's what we've been advising a lot of our clients on, is that you don't have to do everything all at once in order to satisfy the DOJ, but you do need to devote some thought and attention to how you prioritize what it is you're going to achieve in your compliance functions. And so that may be focusing attention on a particular geography. In some cases, I would offer Brazil, simply because that has been a geography that has been a focus of U.S. government. I think they're comfortable operating in cases there now. I think that it helps that they have, what we were talking about, resources or channels through which they can engage in cross-border cooperation. And so, that you can take it by geography or you can take it by other risk areas. But really, I think that's kind of to get to the central part of your question. What we are seeing and what we are helping our clients with is how to prioritize and how to tackle this large task for many of our clients kind of one step at a time in a way that will demonstrate thought and commitment to compliance, but doesn't require devoting resources that just aren't available, right, to tackling this problem all at once.
Thanks, Grant. Thinking about prioritizing, I'm curious about how this is happening in Brazil. As Adriana mentioned, a couple of years ago, we had this big wave of like every single company was implementing a compliance program. And naturally, this compliance program needs to evolve as the company changes and risk changes. So I wanted to hear from you, Adriana, whether like you have seen companies prioritizing different areas and developing further their compliance programs recently.
For sure, we have seen a great development here in Brazil in the past years. The practice from the perspective of advisors, of counsel, and also chief compliance officers or teams of compliance experts has evolved a lot. There is a lot of training that has been offered, and also the experience of having been involved in these major cases brought a lot of growth and knowledge to many companies. I still see that the level of companies' compliance program differ a lot, and depending on the tone at the top, on whether the company has been involved in a major problem. There are a number of our huge multinationals which have been subject to cases not only in Brazil but overseas. Monitorships are also a source of growth and improvement of compliance programs. At CGU, we have a program, the Proética certificate that also evaluates the compliance program of companies. We have seen this type of certification widespreading, and they are currently released by the other ministries, such as the Ministry of Infrastructure and other entities around the Brazilian administration. So, of course, we have seen a development, but it's still, for me, I still watch a level of discussion, specifically in board committees or at the senior management level that sometimes surprises me. In terms of during the pandemic, there was a reduction in the budget of certain compliance departments around the industry and the service industry in Brazil. So I notice that there is it varies from sector to sector. The perception that enforcement has reduced its pace also plays a role in this situation. Whereas companies, when they have to deal with their budget, and sometimes often this budget is not unlimited, when they see that authorities are not focused on anti-corruption enforcement at the national level, they tend to less prioritize the investment that they would otherwise do in their compliance functions and areas. So what I have seen is that companies that have been subject to major settlements or are under monitorship continue to evolve, and others as well, in particularly those that operate overseas. But I have also seen others that had reduced their level of investment and they have prioritized in other areas of their that needed the required resources and reduce their compliance areas. So I have seen different movements depending on the levels and the priorities that were established by higher management.
Thanks, Adriana. And it makes sense to see this reduction during the pandemic, especially because of all budget problems. Grant, I'm not sure if you want to comment on anything that Adriana said. I imagine that you want.
I mostly just to echo what Adriana is discussing and identifying. I think you saw that in the U.S. as well, and that is part of the tension that we're dealing with, right? It's that during the pandemic, some very difficult choices had to be made in terms of continuing operations of a company, and some of the results of that were hard choices that had to be made about resources devoted to compliance. You are coming off of that, and some would say we are still in it in some form or fashion as far as the pandemic is concerned, and some uncertainty in the economy. But at the same time, you have tremendous pressure coming from the authorities that are saying what you were doing yesterday or what you were doing even before the pandemic is not enough, and that you need to do more. And so I think it creates a lot of pressure and a lot of hard decisions in boardrooms and in for executives to have to manage and balance these competing concerns. So I completely agree with Adriana and the challenges that companies are facing in this regard. And yeah, all speaks to how I think we are probably both advising our clients on how you take this, a step at a time, or how you prioritize. That I think is key.
Yeah.
One thing that Rafa, that I would like to comment, 2 points. One is that the ESG movement that has received a lot of emphasis recently puts greater emphasis on ethics and integrity. Integrity, as you know, is at the base of ESG. Without integrity and transparency, you cannot move forward with the other pillars. So this is important for attracting investments, for the PR policy of the company, among many other factors. So I believe that this also has placed a greater emphasis on compliance programs. And also when you see that the recent decree that revised the regulation of the Brazilian Company Act, changes the role or gives a greater attention to compliance programs as a source of reduction of the sanction that can be imposed on corporations as a result of, in the context of administrative procedure. Before we would have up to 4% of a reduction. Now this this percentage represents 5. So it shows that there is a greater emphasis. And the challenge of building a culture of integrity shouldn't be underestimated. It needs investment. I personally serve as an independent monitor to the Federal Prosecutor's Office here in Brazil, and it's hard to build a structured culture that will influence the decisions of employees, independent of their levels, require a lot of effort. So, although the pandemic caused some budgetary constraints, I hope that moving forward, compliance will continue to be a priority because it's necessary.
Yeah. I'm sure it will. And we have seen the same movement, the ESG movement in the US as well. And that makes a lot of sense what you said. So just going back to the US strategy memo, one of the things in the introduction that it discusses is the impacts of corruption in the society as a whole. And I've been waiting the entire panel to ask Bernardo to give his expert view on the economics side of everything. And Bernardo, please just give us your economics view of like the impacts of corruption on a country and the society as a whole. We'll love to hear that.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me. Thanks for being able to join you. You're the expert, not me. I'm just a kind of outsider observer of anti-corruption and of things that are related to it as much more as a citizen, an interested citizen. But as an economist, I have been asked to make my call here. So it's difficult because, for one, as I am no expert or also in anti-corruption, I have lots of freedom to choose how to focus. But on the other side, this very freedom, as everyone with anti-corruption concerns would agree, it's kind of lacking focus and structure. So it's kind of a challenge. But I guess that what my views would convey would be bottom line. I'll start for the bottom line. Bottom line is that anti-corruption, as in many other policies fields, is about policy and about institution building in the end. So there's no other way. It's no easy way. It's a bit by bit process that encompasses building not only regulations and stuff like that and laws, but also the building up of what we are seeing right here. That's the building up of a network that encompasses both private and public people. So this is the bottom line. For one, let me just share with you very briefly some thoughts about it. First, corruption is kind of pervasive. It's not a third world concern. It's not just public sector concern. It's pervasive. I have read the ex-President Trump complaining yesterday about his being raided by the FBI. Grant is laughing about it. I advise everyone to read his complaint. It's lots of information there, but I'll just pick up one that was not on the newspapers. He was saying just like that. now U.S. is a third world corrupt state. That's how he has put it. So he equates corruption with third world environment, and despite his if the evident bias, I would say that this kind of bias is also pervasive. Now and again, we see mostly on economics, people equate underdevelopment, is a word that I don't like for my taste, not for my taste, but like underdevelopment and bad institutions and corruption. That's kind of an equation that's not a good signal for enforcement. So and also I would say that corruption is not just a public sector concern, as we are seeing here with our discussion. It's related out. We have, of course, a strictly private sector corruption concerns, and also strictly public sector corruption concerns. But we mostly would like to talk about the interaction between private and public sector concerns and this networking of policymakers, so to say, policymaking, and this is, I guess, the right angle to look into anti-corruption and to corruption in the first place, and to put it somehow in economic terms, we'd say that corruption equates somehow to rent seeking in economics terms, but people and liberal, I think the Brazilian sense of liberal, but conservative economists would equate rents with corruption. So rent seeking and to provide companies to monopoly rents are kind of the root of all evil. And it's interesting to think like that, because rents, for one, if you have read Schumpeter somehow in your somewhere, it's not an evil in itself. The other way around, rents, monopoly rents are the kind of engine of innovation. If you have to pursue rents, are kind of a target for companies to innovate. So we could not try to evade the discussion of corruption and rent seeking, to put the blame on rents and monopoly rents, because we would need to think more deeply about how to pursue rents and how to create rents through innovation policies in the private and public sector at the same time. So we cannot get the competition policies to boost competition in a way to compete away, so to say, rents. So rents is part of the game, so to say, and they are intrinsic to the economy path to innovation and to growth and to development. On the other side, public policies, or the state more widely considered, is not also evil. So we cannot put the blame on the public sector by itself. Somehow we see many people putting on a recipe to get rid of corruption. So let's get rid of monopolies, and let's get rid of the vehicle of monopolies that somehow are bad public policies. So we have to live with both private rents, monopoly rents as a target for innovation, and also with policies, because of what we have in place all over the places big business and big government. We will not get rid of them. So you have to live with them. And so I guess now I can, from this kind of reasoning, reach a somehow the same conclusion that you guys are presenting here, that we have no shortcomings to pursue. So we have to pursue bit by bit in a long-lasting point of view and long-lasting policies to build up institutions. And this is all about anti-corruption and many other policies for that matter. So I guess that from an economic perspective, I would like to add this kind of high-level thought. It's not an expert thought, but something that would link economics to anti-corruption policies and try to convey this message of institution building. That I guess the same message you guys are bringing to our audience here. So that's what I have to present you today. Thank you.
Thanks, Bernardo. Very, very interesting. We are running out of time. I just want to give the chance to Grant and Adriana to comment on that and share any other thoughts that you still want to share with the group.
I'll start, Adriana, if it's okay. And Bernardo, thank you for that. I think it is a really helpful reminder. I think because what you see in the U.S. strategy memo and others is that a lot of these concepts that you're speaking to, Bernardo, are those are kind of the anchor points for what it is I think the U.S. is trying to achieve in its goals and objectives for rooting out corruption and the impact that it has kind of globally, kind of across all nations, wherever you go, you will find examples of it. And so I think it's a very helpful reminder of kind of what really the guidepost is, what the kind of the guiding star is here for what it is we're trying to achieve long term. It's a Herculean, a huge task, but one that I think the terms that you put them in is consistent with the broader objectives of what we're seeing from the Biden administration. And I think that the result is that the practical result is, as you were saying, is that there is an emphasis on both the public sector and the private sector. But of course, I focus a lot on the private sector, on doing what they can to help level the playing field, so to speak, perhaps in economic terms, so that the benefits of kind of an economy where corruption doesn't exist can be realized for all involved. So I just thank you, Bernardo, for that helpful insight. I don't know, Adriana, if you have maybe closing thoughts or more to add.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Grant and Bernardo. Bernardo, I also loved your thoughts, and in this role that I currently have at the Inter-American Development Bank, I can watch and see in practice how corruption goes hand in hand with poverty, and it's really a vicious cycle. And you have, for instance, projects that are financed. The most famous one are the big EPC projects that we see that are the big settlements. But we have smaller cases where investment that was made to improve education in very rural areas or very poor areas around the Latin American region, or even to sell equipment to fight COVID and others. The money goes to corruption or to fraudulent schemes and do not go to the rightful hands. So it's scary to see how this happens because corruption and related crimes are the types of illegal actions that don't lead to a simultaneous effect. In other words, you commit the illegal act, but the results will be watched in the medium long run when you don't have, for example, the hospital ready to receive the patients, or the road is not in the perfect stage and accidents are caused, and so on. But at the IDB, I can see how the investments could be diverted. And the presidency has defined, and the board of the Inter-American Development Bank has established that fighting corruption is a top priority, because the bank has to honor the grants and the money that was donated by donors, and ensure that it goes to the right hand. So this has been a great focus. As a matter of fact, the number of cases that have been subject to the system, to the sanction system, has increased 40% last year. So this shows that there is a lot of attention put into fighting corruption in this illegal actions, and I couldn't agree more with you, Bernardo. And it's a difficult task, and requires a lot of hard work. And I'm happy to see so many great minds behind this effort. So with that, I close, Ceci and Rafa.
Thank you very much, Adriana, Grant, and Bernardo. And thank you all for joining us today. I'm not sure if we have, Cisa, do we have time for questions?
You have 10 minutes. If
and I don't know if anyone has questions. If so, you can post in the chat. Typically, there aren't many questions. So I don't think we're going to have questions as usual. But hearing nothing, I think we can wrap up. I'm just going to say thank you again for Grant, Bernardo, Adriana, Bruno, and Cecilia, and just give the mic to Cisa to close the event.
It was a very beautiful discussion. It was very complementary. Each one thoughts here about anti-corruption, about what's happening in Brazil, what is happening in the US, also about for this economic point of view that Bernardo discussed here. And so the only thing that I can do is thank you again to accept our invitation. It was a pleasure to have you at IBRAC. Thank you, Rafaela, for organizing this webinar. It was perfect. And so that's it. Bruno, if you'd like to say something.
Just to thank you again, Grant and Adriana. Congratulate Rafaela and Cisa for the organization. Thank you, Bernardo, as well for the debate. It has been a very productive morning. We learned more about how the US is thinking its policy, also with the contributions of the local authorities here in Brazil as well. So thanks again to everyone.